Well, the latest episode of Blaze TV's The Coverup exposes how the same apparatus that created the COVID narrative also created the Russia hoax. Take a look.
All of media went through this ship.
It was a fake story.
The Trump campaign colluded with Russia.
It was particularly the Russiagate story.
A U.S.-financed accident that came out of Wuhan.
Believing the science.
Operation Mockingbird on steroids.
When we looked at these censorship programs, we realized they were trying to re-engineer how people thought.
That makes your blood boil, then you're in the right place. Joining us now is the man behind the docuseries, Matt Kibbe. He is the president of Free the People and Blaze TV host of Kibbe on Liberty. So thanks so much, because we've had you on. We've talked about this series. It is an incredible series. Everybody can go catch up, binge watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But we saw Matt Kibbe in that clip. He's prominently featured in the 5th episode here. So just take us through how we see the COVID link and the Russia hoax link.
So as I got into this deeper and deeper, I discovered that there was a very explicit link between what I'll call the military industrial complex and the COVID industrial complex. And this episode is about how they create the narrative. So I'll call that the censorship industrial complex. And for people that don't remember, Matt Kibbe was actually pushed out of Rolling Stone magazine for refusing to accept the Russiagate narrative going all the way back. So he's been obsessed about this. And when they went in, when Elon Musk invited them in to do the Twitter files, he was thinking Hunter Biden laptop story. He was thinking Russiagate. And in the process of exposing how the government was in collusion with the media on that stuff, they accidentally discovered, these same guys had blacklisted Bhattacharya. They were blacklisting all of the COVID dissidents in that process. So you start to discover that this isn't really about COVID. It's not even about Russiagate. It's about this massive censorship apparatus that wants to control how and what we think.
Well, Matt, that was one of the most frightening parts of this most recent episode. And by the way, incredible series. It's probably the best one. Well, it is the best one that we've seen so far on this entire cover-up affair. But what was most frightening was the infiltration of our town halls, Facebook, Twitter, etc., by our intelligence services, DOD, CIA, FBI, not just running intel ops, but guiding and directing what could and couldn't be said, and then also guiding and directing who should be taken off or have their voice throttled.
One of the things we go into Kibbe's cutting his teeth during the fall of the Soviet Union, and he's seen Russian propaganda, and he says this is the same thing, except that the media, the journalists, they're not only complicit, they think they're on the team. So they're not necessarily being paid. They're not being bullied like during Operation Mockingbird. They're actually part of the team. So we don't have a free press in this country inside corporate media.
And they'll label you conspiracy theorists, and they'll say, these are wild accusations. Take us into just the conspiracy theory, how this narrative is being used to manipulate us, because everybody knows now it's only a conspiracy theory until you wait a certain amount of time, and then that becomes the truth now.
Intelligence operatives have always used conspiracy theorists as the go-to smear for anybody that's actually exposing something that's actually true. And you saw it throughout Russiagate. You certainly saw it throughout COVID. The most serious people, the most serious scientists, like Bhattacharya is a, now head of the NIH, which is beautiful karma. But, he's a decorated Stanford epidemiologist, not someone who is anyway a fringe thing. But they try to discredit you just by smearing you in that way. And I would say every time they say that now, you should keep digging, because no matter how crazy it sounds, the thing you're thinking, you're like connecting dots like Glenn Beck on a chalkboard, and it turns out that you're scratching at something that needs to be investigated.
Going back to the Russia part of his story, that was very fascinating to me personally. But what was really key was that these journalists that he was referring to over here, they have formed a kind of a coalition with one another in order to spout the approved narrative. Now, one of the things that happened when I was dealing with this and dealing with my own voice being throttled by Facebook in particular, that's where I had my largest following at the time, was that they actually had, and this was incredible, my biggest throttling fact check moment, which I went to war with them over, was an actual Hollywood gossip columnist was fact-checking a peer-reviewed NIH study on masking, a Hollywood gossip columnist.
Yeah. Taibbi points out, I didn't not know this story, but the Aspen Institute, which is heavily funded by government, it's kind of a deep state operation in and of itself, actually had a bunch of mainstream journalists, corporate journalists, come out a year before the Hunter Biden laptop story comes out. And the practice was, let's imagine that there's this Hunter Biden laptop story. What is the narrative we want to come out of this story? And then fast forward, and this was revealed in the Twitter files, fast forward, and they did what they planned to do. So it's like, this is not a coincidence.
So you're on the deep state here. Let's stick with that, because we know this is the main problem facing our country right now. If we're going to have any freedom moving forward, we have to deal with this directly. And we see this happening now with DNI Tulsi Gabbard. She's going through and trying to drop all these documents, specifically with the Russiagate hoax. How do we go forward, and what needs to be done now? Can it just be one office, one person, one group of people, the dig over there at ODNI, that's going to go through and say, okay, well, America, here's the documents. Can it actually be done that way, or do we need it to be on a grander scale?
Well, you have to dismantle the whole thing, and that's going to require legislation. It's going to require budget cuts, and it's going to have to require more than just Tulsi Gabbard, because she's not necessarily surrounded by a bunch of career bureaucrats that want her to succeed in what she's doing. And I would take even a step further, which is why I'm doing the series in the first place, is that we, U.S. citizens, we the people, we need to do it, because this deep state thing is actually deeper than I think any of us even understand.
Did Matt Taibbi, in your interview, because it wasn't really covered in the hour-long version or episode here, did he ever express any personal concerns about his own safety during this coverage, particularly when he got into the Twitter files?
He did, and we touched on it in the episode, but we went deeper. I mean, he actually had the IRS show up at his house the day that he testified before Jordan's committee on this stuff. So he expresses some concern, but he also thinks that he's so public, he's hard to get.
Well, you flashed on the screen a couple of the Russian journalists who had been assassinated for doing just nothing more than their job. And so that's why I wondered if that conversation between you and him, and maybe it was private and you can't go into it, but particularly when you have, because when the IRS shows up at your door, you know, they have a criminal investigation division as well who carries guns.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean that they weren't unarmed when they showed up at the door.
Right. What I tell anybody doing this work, and I'll tell this to you, the only thing that keeps you safe is having a very public, active profile, because then it becomes too obvious. If you're a whistleblower that's trying to keep private, I think that's a very dangerous position to be in, because they know that you're there.
Steve and I frantically taking notes right now, trying to figure this out. When we look at accountability, because that's what this is really all about, we want to go through and make sure that nothing like this happens again. So what does accountability look like in this scenario?
I mean, Rand Paul is going to be calling Anthony Fauci back up before the committee, and everybody would like to see that, and they'd like to see accountability for the specific players who committed the specific crimes. But I think the real story has to be uprooting the architects of the system itself. And that goes deep. And I don't think a president can do this alone. I think we're going to need people like Rand Paul relentlessly doing this, but we're going to need reporters like Steve and Matt Taibbi who are going to do it from the outside, because I think that's really the only way to get at it. You have to expose it, and people have to be so angry about it that you force the political class, most of whom are cowards, to do something.
Now, if Senator Paul brings Fauci back in. And he perjures himself before Congress once again. What's going to happen this time? Is there any impetus whatsoever to have the sergeant-at-arms arrest them for their perjury or to turn them over to the DOJ? Are they ready to do that now or not?
I don't know. We'll find out. That was certainly Rand Paul's calculus when he took the chairmanship, assuming that he needed a DOJ that was willing to fight that fight. I'm hoping that President Trump feels royally screwed over by Fauci's bait and switch on Operation Warp Speed and all that shenanigans that they so obviously have now been exposed to do, that he's willing to get a little bit of revenge.
Well, we're talking about Rand Paul. You were in the state of Texas this weekend for Ron Paul and his 90th birthday party. Take us behind the scenes and just what that was like.
It was so cool. There are so many Ron Paul activists who discovered these ideas. You know, I'm an Austrian economics dork, and no one has done more to spread the ideas of obscure economists like Ludwig von Mises. But it's more of a concert than a think thing. And there was music. Jimmy Vaughn was there, one of my favorite blues guitarists, iconic figure. And I was saying to Steve earlier, there are Ron Paul babies who met at a Ron Paul rally who then proceeded to have their own Ron Paul babies. So we have a multi-generational liberty movement that sort of live and breathe it. It's not about getting someone elected per se. It's about living and breathing these ideas. And they just love and adore that guy. And what a badass he is, chugging away at 90 years old.
We were going to give you grief for not making sure we had tickets before you went down there, but I didn't know how
the aftermarket was brutal.
Right.
It was like trying to get a dead ticket.
I can imagine it was. You know, my first exposure to Ron Paul when he was a congressman, and this was in 1998. I was at a conference in Aruba, and he was the keynote speaker down there, and he just absolutely blew my mind. And the most significant thing that he said to the audience down there is he said that the GOP primaries me every 2 years. And he said, and that's with me not going home to my constituents and telling them that I'm going to bring home the bacon. I tell them that I'm not going to do that, and yet they still put me in office every single time.
So Chip Roy was down there, Congressman Chip Roy, and he was on my show, and he says, you know, behind closed doors, most of my colleagues will admit Ron Paul was right about everything. And I said, how many of them will say that publicly? Besides you and Thomas Masson? He's like, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're getting there. The tide is turning. People are coming around. Matt Kibbe, thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate it.
It's good to be here, yeah.
Yes, go watch the Coverup. The 5th episode is up, as well as all the first 4. So it is a great time. It's there at theblazetv.com. When we come back, we will have Joe Hanneman. We'll get into the Minnesota assassinations. There is so much more to uncover there. Stay with us.